On December 30th, 1947, King Michael I of Romania found himself staring down the barrel of an impossible ultimatum inside Elizabeta Palace. Soviet-backed communist authorities had surrounded the estate, cut the communications, and explicitly threatened the mass execution of over 1,000 imprisoned students if the 26-year-old monarch refused to abdicate. Faced with state-sponsored terror, Michael signed the document, boarded a closely guarded train into exile, and saw his royal house formally dismantled overnight. To the communist regime, this forced exit was meant to erase Romania's monarchy from history entirely, reducing an entire dynasty into a forgotten relic of the pre-war order. What makes this chapter of European history so compelling, however, is that losing a throne did not mean losing institutional memory or social relevance. Rather than dissolving into the quiet obscurity of European high society, Michael and his family spent 4 decades in modest Western exile, constantly monitored by the Romanian Securitate, while maintaining a voice for the anti-communist diaspora. When the Ceausescu dictatorship collapsed in 1989, the royal family did not simply ask for nostalgia. They attempted to return, triggering a profound existential panic among the newly installed post-communist leadership who feared a popular royal restoration might destabilize the fledgling republic. Today, the fate of Michael's descendants represents one of the most unusual legal and diplomatic compromises in modern geopolitics. Without restoring the monarchy or altering Romania's republican constitution, King Michael's daughters and grandchildren managed to integrate back into national life, reclaiming historical private estates and operating as state-recognized ambassadors of civic soft power. But this journey has been far from straightforward. It has been defined by internal succession civil wars, international court battles over illegitimate heirs, and a struggle to define what royal blood actually means in 21st century Eastern Europe. When King Michael I and his new bride, Princess Anne of Bourbon-Parma, departed Romania in early 1948, communist state propaganda aggressively circulated rumors that the monarch had fled with train cars overflowing with national gold, jewels, and priceless art. The reality on the ground was starkly different. Michael was permitted to leave with little more than personal clothing, a few private heirlooms, and 4 automobiles. Overnight, the communist regime nationalized every royal property, seized domestic bank accounts, and stripped the family of citizenship, leaving a 26-year-old sovereign with the heavy burden of historic legitimacy, but virtually no liquid capital to sustain a life in Western Europe. Unlike established Western royal dynasties that held extensive international investment portfolios, the Romanian royal house had tied almost all its wealth to domestic land, estates, and state infrastructure. The loss of the throne was therefore an immediate financial shock. Michael and Anne suddenly had to navigate the mundane pressures of post-war European economic realities, paying rent, managing rising living expenses, and supporting 5 daughters born between 1949 and 1964. The romantic illusion of aristocratic exile quickly gave way to the practical demands of daily survival in an unfamiliar capitalist marketplace. Between 1950 and 1956, the royal couple attempted to build a self-sufficient livelihood in rural England, settling at Ayotte Green and later The Grange in Ayotte, St. Lawrence, Hertfordshire. Michael established a commercial market garden and poultry farm, personally rolling up his sleeves to feed livestock, clean coops, manage egg logistics, and sell timber from the property. This British chapter offered a dramatic contrast in 20th-century statecraft. A man trained from childhood to command armed forces and navigate great power diplomacy was now spending his mornings calculating grain feed margins and negotiating wholesale produced prices with local grocers. When agricultural farming proved too volatile to ensure long-term stability, Michael relocated his family to Switzerland and pivoted toward his lifelong passion: mechanical engineering and aviation. Drawing on his extensive wartime flight experience, Michael trained as a commercial pilot and secured employment in Geneva as a test pilot for the American aircraft company Lear Jet, and later worked with an electronics and equipment brokerage firm. This transition into the technical sector was remarkable for a European monarch, replacing hereditary entitlement with rigorous technical qualification and high-risk aerodynamic labor. The economic endurance of the household was equally anchored by Queen Anne, whose resilience mirrored Michael's pragmatic approach to life. Having served as an ambulance driver with the French Free Forces during World War II, where she was decorated with the Croix de Guerre, Anne was completely unaccustomed to courtly vanity. During the leanest years in Geneva and Britain, she ran the household without domestic staff, managed strict domestic budgets, and briefly worked in retail, ensuring their daughters grew up grounded in normal middle-class discipline rather than obsolete court protocol. Crucially, this financial struggle played out under the constant shadow of Cold War espionage. Declassified files from the Romanian Securitate reveal that communist intelligence operatives maintained active surveillance on Michael's residences, workplaces, and financial transactions across Switzerland. The regime feared that financial independence might enable the king to fund a coordinated anti-communist government in exile. For Michael, maintaining solvency through honest private labor was not merely a matter of pride. It was an essential strategy to ensure he never became beholden to foreign political patrons or questionable financial backers. From a broader historical and sociological perspective, Michael's decades of ordinary labor fundamentally redefined the modern Romanian royal brand. By rejecting the idle decadence often associated with deposed European royalty and instead embracing blue-collar and technical professions, he preserved an untainted moral integrity. When the communist dictatorship finally collapsed in 1989, the Romanian public was not confronted by an out-of-touch aristocrat expecting inherited privilege, but by an elderly pilot and mechanic whose quiet dignity had been forged through 4 decades of hard work and sacrifice. The collapse of Nicolae Ceausescu's brutal communist dictatorship in December 1989 sent shockwaves across Eastern Europe, opening a sudden vacuum of power and legitimacy in Romania. While millions of citizens celebrated the fall of the regime on the streets of Bucharest, the political landscape was quickly seized by the National Salvation Front, FSN, a coalition largely composed of former mid-level communist officials led by Ion Iliescu. For these new leaders, the sudden emergence of King Michael IV, who remained a potent symbol of pre-communist constitutional democracy, represented an immediate and terrifying threat to their fragile political monopoly. Sensing the shifting mood of a population eager to reconnect with its historic identity, King Michael attempted to make his first return to his homeland in December 1990, nearly 4 decades after his forced exile. Armed with a diplomatic passport issued by the Swiss government, Michael landed at Otopeni Airport accompanied by members of his royal household, intending to visit historical family monasteries and reconnect with the Romanian people. However, the Iliescu administration viewed this homecoming not as a private cultural visit, but as an insurgent political threat capable of derailing their nascent regime. The confrontation culminated in a dramatic highway blockade on Christmas Day in 1990, transforming a diplomatic visit into an authoritarian spectacle. As Michael's convoy traveled along the Bucharest-Pitești highway toward the Curtea de Argeș monastery, heavily armed special police units and state security vehicles intercepted the vehicles, forced the royal passengers out at gunpoint, and transported them under military escort back to the border. The official justification cited technical passport irregularities, but the underlying message was transparent. The post-communist government would use raw state power to keep the royal family physically exiled. This heavy-handed expulsion backfired spectacularly, inadvertently transforming King Michael into a potent martyr of democratic resistance. Far from silencing public curiosity, the state's aggressive reaction galvanized opposition groups, independent intellectuals, and ordinary citizens who saw the incident as proof that the old communist apparatus had merely changed its clothes rather than its methods. The image of a former monarch being hunted down on a Romanian highway galvanized a public hunger for historical truth, thrusting the legitimacy of the Republican government into an intense national debate. Realizing that outright bans were fueling public backlash, the Romanian authorities attempted a calculated containment strategy during the Easter holidays of 1992. Under immense domestic and international pressure, the government granted Michael a limited 72-hour visa to visit the country. The regime anticipated a quiet, controlled religious pilgrimage that would quickly fade from the headlines, but they fundamentally miscalculated the depth of public sentiment and the lingering emotional resonance of the crown. What unfolded during those 3 days in April 1992 stunned international observers and terrified the political elite in Bucharest. Over 1 million people poured onto the streets, blocking central boulevards and transforming Michael's procession into one of the largest mass demonstrations in modern European history, chanting pro-monarchy slogans and waving national flags with the communist insignia cut out. The massive crowds demonstrated that decades of state propaganda had failed to erase the historical memory of the monarchy from the national consciousness. Fearing that this spontaneous display of affection could lead to an immediate popular uprising and a call for constitutional restoration, the government abruptly panicked and banned Michael from making any further public addresses. Shortly after the Easter visit concluded, the authorities barred him from entering Romania for another 5 years, proving that the post-communist state remained deeply insecure. Yet, the psychological barrier had been broken. The Republic could no longer pretend the royal family was irrelevant, setting the stage for a forced, pragmatic political reconciliation in the years to come. The relationship between the modern Romanian state and the royal house represents one of the most curious constitutional anomalies in post-Cold War Europe. While Romania is explicitly defined by its 1991 constitution as a democratic, indivisible republic, the state has actively carved out a formal institutional framework to accommodate the descendants of the dynasty it constitutionally deposed. This arrangement is not rooted in traditional monarchical restoration, but rather in a calculated socio-legal compromise. The state leverages royal heritage and international prestige as civic assets, while the royal family agrees to operate strictly within the bounds of the Republican Constitution. At the center of this legal framework is the Romanian Parliament's decision to grant the Royal House of Romania formal public utility status. Under this classification, the activities of the custodian of the Crown and her administrative apparatus are recognized as serving the broader national interest, particularly in areas of cultural preservation, international relations, and educational advancement. Consequently, the Romanian state allocates public funds to help maintain royal administrative operations and historic properties, creating a system where taxpayers support the machinery of an ex-royal household inside an active republic. This relationship was further solidified through the state's decision to grant the royal family official usage rights to prominent public real estate, most notably the Elisabeta Palace in central Bucharest. Although the property remains technically within state hands, the palace functions effectively as an active diplomatic and civic headquarters for Crown Princess Margareta and Prince Radu. Within these walls, the family hosts foreign ambassadors, state banquets, and public ceremonies that look and feel like state functions, even though neither Margareta nor Radu holds an elected or formal executive office under the national charter. To understand why a Republican government would finance and elevate a deposed royal house, one must look at the pragmatic geopolitical benefits that the alliance provides. For modern Romanian politicians, the royal family offers something elected officials often lack: permanent multi-generational networks among Europe's ruling and non-ruling dynasties, as well as an aura of historical legitimacy that transcends party politics. In return for state support and financial backing, the royal house acts as a soft power ambassador, representing Romanian interests abroad without requiring the state to fund a separate diplomatic agency for high-level cultural relations. However, this structural compromise has generated substantial debate among constitutional scholars and domestic critics across the country. Skeptics argue that subsidizing an unelected family blur the foundational principles of a republic, creating an ambiguous hierarchy where hereditary elites receive state privileges without direct democratic accountability. Critics frequently question whether public funding should support an institution whose existence reminds citizens of an era of feudal and monarchical rule that the modern constitution was specifically written to replace. Despite these criticisms, public opinion in Romania has largely tolerated and often embraced this hybrid model because it avoids the political volatility of a full constitutional referendum. Most Romanians do not seek a formal return to a ruling monarchy, yet they hold deep respect for the moral stature of King Michael and recognize the family's value as cultural custodians. The current arrangement provides the nation with a sense of historical continuity and European royal prestige, while ensuring that real legislative and executive power remains entirely with democratically elected institutions. Ultimately, this constitutional paradox demonstrates how Eastern European post-communist transitions have had to invent entirely original legal structures to resolve the scars of 20th-century totalitarianism. By neutralizing the political threat of a royal restoration through institutional co-optation and formal public utility laws, the Romanian Republic did not just make peace with its royal past, it turned the descendants of its last monarch into permanent, state-supported functionaries of its own modern republican diplomacy. By the early 2000s, King Michael I faced an existential dilemma that threatened to extinguish his family's historical lineage in Romania: the question of succession under traditional dynastic law. The last royal constitution of Romania, enacted in 1923, as well as the family's 1884 dynastic statute, strictly adhered to the ancient Salic law. Under this system of strict agnatic primogeniture, only males could inherit the crown, and women were entirely excluded from the line of succession. Because Michael and Queen Anne had 5 daughters and no sons, the historical succession rules dictated that upon Michael's death, leadership of the Romanian dynasty would legally pass to distant German relatives in the house of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen. For Michael, handing the symbolic representation of Romania to distant German aristocrats who did not speak Romanian and had never lived in the country was an unacceptable outcome. The world had evolved significantly since the early 20th century, and modern European monarchies, including those in Sweden, the Netherlands, and Belgium, had already overhauled their constitutional frameworks to adopt gender-neutral equal primogeniture. If the Romanian royal house was to maintain moral authority and cultural relevance in 21st century Europe, its internal rules had to align with democratic values and gender equality rather than feudal inheritance doctrines. The turning point occurred on December 30th, 2007, precisely 60 years to the day after his forced abdication in 1947. In a historic move, King Michael signed and promulgated a private dynastic statute known as the Fundamental Rules of the Royal Family of Romania. Through this document, Michael acted in his capacity as the sovereign head of the dynasty to unilaterally abrogate the old Salic succession laws, replacing them with a modernized framework that allowed female descendants to inherit dynastic titles, privileges, and leadership of the royal household. Through the promulgation of the 27 statute, King Michael officially designated his eldest daughter, Princess Margareta, as the Crown Princess of Romania and custodian of the Romanian crown, Custodele Coroanei Romane. This title was deliberately chosen to reflect a modern civic reality. Margareta was not claiming an active political throne or challenging the Republican state, but was instead entrusted with safeguarding the historical heritage, moral authority, and institutional assets of the Romanian crown for future generations. This dynastic reform also represented an act of national self-determination for the royal house. Under the new rules, Michael effectively detached the Romanian royal line from the historic Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen branch, establishing that the leadership of the family had to remain rooted in the direct, personal lineage of those who had lived the Romanian experience. The reform ensured that the royal representation in Bucharest would remain in the hands of someone who had spent decades organizing humanitarian relief and diplomatic missions for the country, rather than reverting to an overseas cadet branch with no ties to the Romanian people. From a strict constitutional perspective, Michael's 2007 decree created a fascinating legal duality inside the Romanian Republic. Because Romania's modern constitution recognizes neither royal titles nor noble prerogatives, Michael's changes had no formal force of public statutory law. Yet, the Romanian political establishment, the media, and civic institutions widely embraced the decision, readily recognizing Margareta as the legitimate head of the royal house and treating the fundamental rules as a valid private charter governing the royal family's public operations. Ultimately, the 2007 fundamental rules allowed the royal house of Romania to secure its generational continuity and modernize its public identity. By abolishing the archaic Salic law and placing Crown Princess Margareta at the helm of the dynasty, King Michael successfully engineered a peaceful dynastic transition that guaranteed his life's work would not end with his own passing. In doing so, he transformed the crown from a rigid, male-only institution into an adaptable civic symbol capable of thriving inside a modern European republic. The abrupt downfall of Prince Nicholas Medforth Mills in August 2015 sent shockwaves through Romanian society, pulling back the curtain on a bitter internal succession crisis within the royal household. Nicholas had emerged as the dynamic, youthful face of the monarchy, popular with ordinary Romanians, and seen by many as the natural bridge between royal heritage and a new generation. Yet beneath his polished public appearances, deep institutional friction was festering behind palace doors between the young prince and the older administrative guard surrounding Crown Princess Margareta and Prince Radu. A central catalyst for the royal rupture involved an explosive personal controversy, an alleged paternity dispute in Romania. Reports surfaced that Nicholas had fathered a child out of wedlock with a Romanian woman named Nicoleta Cârjan following an environmental charity cycling tour across the country. For a royal house working tirelessly to maintain an image of moral rectitude and civic dignity, the looming prospect of an unresolved paternity lawsuit represented a major public relations crisis that threatened to compromise the crown's standing. The palace's response was swift, punitive, and unprecedented in modern Romanian royal history. King Michael signed an official decree stripping Nicholas of his princely title, removing him from the line of succession, and expelling him from the official royal house. The formal communique issued by the Royal Council offered an ambiguous explanation, stating that the monarchy required leadership marked by moral modesty, moral rigor, and an understanding of high institutional duty, a coded reprimand that immediately fueled national speculation and tabloid headlines. Behind the moral justification, however, many political observers detected a raw struggle for dynastic control and influence. Nicholas's growing popularity among regular citizens had eclipsed the profile of Crown Princess Margareta and her husband, Prince Radu, creating unease within the administrative core of the royal household. To royal insiders, Nicholas's independence and casual approach to traditional decorum were seen as dangerous liabilities. To his supporters, his removal looked like a calculated political purge designed to eliminate a charismatic rival to the established leadership. The family feud escalated dramatically in November 2017 as King Michael lay dying at his private residence in Aubonne, Switzerland. Nicholas traveled to Switzerland seeking to see his ailing grandfather one last time, but royal staff and family members physically barred him from entering the property. The confrontation quickly turned chaotic. The royal house filed a formal criminal complaint with Swiss police accusing Nicholas of trespassing and physical aggression, while Nicholas publicly maintained that his relatives were keeping the dying monarch isolated from the family. The intense public spectacle severely dented the royal house's carefully constructed image of unity and dignified detachment from petty politics. Longtime royalists and civic organizations found themselves deeply polarized. One camp stood firmly behind Margareta, defending institutional discipline and arguing that private scandals could not be tolerated if the family wished to maintain state funding and public utility status. The other camp viewed the treatment of Nicholas as vindictive and short-sighted, arguing that the monarchy had alienated its only viable young heir. Ultimately, the The controversy surrounding Nicholas revealed the fundamental fragility of a deposed royal dynasty operating without a formal crown. In an active monarchy, succession laws and royal disputes are regulated by constitutional courts and parliament. In a private royal house inside a republic, authority rests solely on personal decrees and family consensus. By cutting ties with Nicholas over personal disputes and internal rivalries, the Romanian royal house chose institutional rigidity over youth appeal, securing Margarita's authority while leaving a major question mark over the dynasty's long-term connection with the next generation. In December 2020, Romania's High Court of Cassation and Justice handed down a landmark ruling that definitively shattered the prestige of a parallel royal claim. Paul Philippe Hohenzollern, widely known in the media as Paul of Romania, was convicted of trading in influence, money laundering, and complicity in abuse of office, receiving a definitive 3-year and 4-month prison sentence. The verdict concluded one of the most high-profile anti-corruption investigations in modern Romanian history, pulling back the curtain on how historic royal claims had been weaponized for high-stakes financial fraud. At the center of the judicial case was the fraudulent restitution of vast state-owned properties, most notably the Snagov Forest and the prestigious Băneasa Royal Farm in northern Bucharest. Romanian anti-corruption prosecutors, DNA, demonstrated that Paul had formed an illicit, organized group with influential businessmen, political advisors, and real estate speculators to claim prime state assets. The mechanism relied on illicit influence over local land commissions and state property administrators, effectively converting disputed aristocratic inheritances into private financial windfalls valued at over 100 million euros. The legal root of this scandal stemmed from a 100-year-old dynastic feud between the official royal line and the Lambrino branch. As the grandson of King Carol II through an unapproved 1918 morganatic marriage to Zizi Lambrino, Paul had fought decades of court battles across France, Portugal, and Romania to secure civil recognition as a legitimate heir. While courts eventually recognized the family lineage for general inheritance rights, Paul systematically leveraged that civil recognition to claim ownership of historic crown domains that had historically belonged to the Romanian state, rather than the royal family's private estate. Rather than awaiting the arrival of law enforcement to serve his prison sentence, Paul fled Romania immediately prior to the Supreme Court's final ruling, triggering the issuance of an Interpol red notice and a European arrest warrant. His flight set off an international game of judicial cat and mouse across Western Europe, where Romanian authorities repeatedly petitioned foreign jurisdictions to execute his extradition. The spectacle of an elderly claimant to the Romanian throne evading international warrants dominated European headlines, offering a bizarre contrast to traditional royal diplomacy. In June 2022, French police apprehended Paul in Paris, but French courts subsequently refused his extradition back to Bucharest, citing technical concerns over detention conditions in Romanian prisons. His freedom, however, proved precarious. In April 2024, Paul was detained once again by authorities in Malta while attending a cultural event, reopening the high-stakes diplomatic and legal battle over his transfer back to Romania. These international legal maneuvers exposed the growing friction between national anti-corruption enforcement and cross-border judicial sovereignty in Europe. The conviction of Paul of Romania produced a catastrophic fallout for the broader public image of royal legacy in Eastern Europe. For decades, King Michael's official household had strictly distanced itself from Paul, arguing that his actions were unauthorized, purely profit-driven, and devoid of genuine service to the country. The scandal fully vindicated the official royal house's warnings, illustrating how unresolved post-communist property restitution laws created lucrative opportunities for predatory speculation under the guise of royal heritage. Ultimately, the criminal saga of the Băneasa and Snagov restitutions exposed the profound economic vulnerabilities of post-communist state transitions. In the chaotic aftermath of Ceausescu's fall, weak regulatory institutions and ambiguous property records allowed ambitious claimants and financial cartels to siphon off public wealth by masquerading as victims of historical injustice. In rendering its final verdict, the Romanian judicial system not only closed the book on an illegitimate dynastic enterprise, but also drew a sharp legal boundary between genuine cultural memory and financial corruption. While Crown Princess Margareta and her sisters Elena and Sofia maintained close ties to European civic life, King Michael's third daughter, Princess Irina, charted a radically different path far from the historic palaces of the continent. Moving to the United States in the early 1980s, Irina settled into rural life in Oregon, marrying an American rancher and largely detaching herself from European aristocratic circles. For decades, she lived as a private American citizen on a modest horse ranch, embodying the distant geographic and social fragmentation that scattered King Michael's descendants across the globe after decades of exile. That quiet rural anonymity was abruptly shattered in August 2013, when federal agents and local law enforcement raided Irina's ranch in Irrigan, Morrow County, Oregon. Princess Irina and her husband, John Wesley Walker, a former deputy sheriff, were arrested as part of a major federal sting operation targeting an illicit underground animal blood sport enterprise. Federal prosecutors indicted the couple along with several dozen co-conspirators, charging them with operating illegal gambling businesses and conducting organized cockfighting events complete with razor-sharp gaffs attached to the birds. The legal fallout quickly escalated beyond an ordinary local crime blotter, transforming into an international media sensation that severely embarrassed the Romanian royal house. Headlines across the United States and Europe exposed how an authentic European royal princess, decorated in royal orders and cousin to Britain's King Charles III, had been running covert cockfighting matches from a barn on an Oregon ranch. Wiretap evidence and undercover agents revealed that the events involved high-stakes wagering, illegal food and alcohol sales, and regular fees collected directly by the couple. Inside Elizabeta Palace in Bucharest, the response from the aging King Michael was one of profound personal distress and institutional resolve. Recognizing the immediate danger to the crown's hard-won moral standing and state reputation, King Michael took immediate action to protect the institution's credibility. In an official statement, the monarch expressed deep sorrow over his daughter's actions, while affirming that the royal family trusted the American justice system to apply the law without favor or aristocratic privilege. In 2014, Irina pleaded guilty in a federal court in Portland to operating an illegal gambling business, avoiding a lengthy prison sentence through a plea agreement. She was sentenced to 3 years of federal probation and agreed to pay a substantial fine, alongside the forfeiture of $200,000 in personal assets to the federal government. Although she avoided prison, the judicial outcome cemented her criminal conviction under United States federal law, permanently closing any possibility of a return to public royal duties. The dynastic punishment from King Michael was absolute and uncompromising. In October 2014, King Michael issued a formal royal decree that permanently stripped Irina of her royal title of Princess of Romania, annulled her Royal Highness style, and formally excised both her and her children, Michael and Angelica, from the Romanian line of succession. The move demonstrated that King Michael's 2007 dynastic reforms were governed by strict moral standards, showing the public that misconduct would result in immediate expulsion regardless of parental affection. The Oregon scandal stands as a cautionary case study in how the loss of an ancestral throne fractures the traditional social safeguards of royal dynasties. Stripped of their hereditary state incomes, institutional advisors, and the structured lifestyle of an active monarchy, individual descendants frequently drift into precarious economic environments and dubious ventures, while Margareta was able to reinvent the royal house as an elite diplomatic engine in Bucharest. Irina's American tragedy revealed the dark, chaotic underbelly of royal exile in modern times. The transformation of the Romanian royal house from a deposed dynasty in exile to a state-supported diplomatic asset is an unusual case study in post-Cold War European politics. Without demanding a constitutional referendum or seeking executive authority over the Republican government, Crown Princess Margareta and her household developed a dedicated role within modern Romanian public life. By stepping away from the direct pursuit of a restored throne, the royal family successfully aligned their hereditary prestige with the strategic objectives of the modern state, turning royal heritage into an active instrument of civic engagement and soft power diplomacy. At the center of this diplomatic role is the family's international outreach across Europe. Over the past 3 decades, Margareta and Prince Radu have undertaken hundreds of official and semi-official foreign visits, meeting with heads of state, foreign ministries, and European royalty to advocate for Romania's geopolitical priorities. This diplomatic capital proved instrumental during the critical negotiations for Romania's entry into NATO and the European Union, and it continues to provide the Foreign Ministry in Bucharest with a back channel for cultural and economic partnerships across the Western world. Beyond formal diplomacy, the royal household has embedded itself deeply into Romanian civil society through large-scale philanthropy and institutional leadership. The Margareta of Romania Royal Foundation, Fundația Regală Margareta a României, established in 1990, has directed millions of euros into community development, elderly care, and educational scholarships for underprivileged youth. Margareta's long-standing leadership as the president of the Romanian Red Cross, an organization historically founded under the patronage of Queen Elizabeth in the 19th century, further solidifies the family's image as nonpartisan public servants dedicated to humanitarian welfare. This institutional bridge also extends beyond Romania's modern borders, playing a calculated role in the Republic of Moldova. Through regular visits to Chișinău, educational partnerships, and direct engagement with Moldovan civil society, the royal house actively reinforces the shared historical, cultural, and linguistic ties between the two states. In an era of acute regional instability in Eastern Europe, this royal diplomacy serves as a subtle, state-aligned mechanism to support Moldova's broader European integration, demonstrating how ancient dynastic legitimacy can be adapted to support 21st century geopolitical alignments. However, The enduring paradox of this arrangement is that the royal family remains an institution without an active throne. While King Michael's funeral in 2017 drew hundreds of thousands of mourners and the highest levels of state honors, the Romanian public remains overwhelmingly committed to its democratic republic. The broad, civic affection shown to the royal house reflects a deep reverence for historical memory and a respect for King Michael's personal integrity, rather than a national desire to dismantle the Republican Constitution and reinstate a ruling monarchy. The long-term survival of the dynasty still faces significant structural challenges. Following the exclusion of Prince Nicholas and the lack of children between Margareta and Prince Radu, the future leadership of the royal house relies on succession lines that carry little name recognition among the general public. If the institution is to maintain its relevance in the decades ahead, it will need to prove to future generations of Romanians that a private royal house supported by public utility statutes provides tangible, ongoing value to the modern republic. Ultimately, the story of King Michael's descendants proves that modern royal power is no longer measured by territorial sovereignty or hereditary rule, but by adaptability, moral credibility, and public utility. By surviving 4 decades of communist exile, returning to a hostile post-authoritarian landscape, and transforming their historical legacy into an engine for modern civic diplomacy, the descendants of Romania's last king achieved what few deposed dynasties ever could, an enduring, respected place inside the very republic that replaced them. If you enjoyed this deep dive into modern geopolitical history, hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to support the channel. Join the conversation in the comments below. Do you believe a republic should fund and support a deposed royal dynasty as a diplomatic asset, or should all hereditary institutions remain strictly private? Let us know your thoughts and stay tuned for the next documentary.